I asked him to come and talk about, he works a lot with youth as part of his practice.
I believe there's kind of two paths that we have to walk at the same time in life if we're going to be happy and make a difference. And one is to be of service to others, and one is to discover who we are. For the most part, I look forward and I get my joy from service and being involved with youth. So I went immediately and registered for graduate school and got my degree as a master's degree in education. And after that, then I worked 40 years approximately with young people as a psychology teacher, as a coach, as a therapist. I was a clinical psychologist at Family Life Mental Health Center in Coon Rapids, was in private practice, continued to be around youth almost 24/7 and loved it. It was my passion, it was my joy, it was what I wanted to do with my life. Okay. So when I retired in 2010, I thought I should write a book because what I saw was some disconcerting trends with young people. I saw young people really struggling. For example, suicide rates were dropping into younger and younger ages. And I saw that in my class. I would lose, once in a while you would lose somebody to that. And it concerned me. And I was thinking the whole while, what's going on in the culture? Because I wasn't blaming the students for the depression. But something was causing more of those kids. So my book starts, this running on empty, and the subtitle is Transcending the Economic Culture Seduction of Your Youth. But anyway, the first chapter in the book is called The $1 Million Question. Because in 1981 or 2, I read in the it was in the Los Angeles Times, a study that said, they asked young people, I think they were high school seniors or they were freshmen in college, would you kill somebody if you could be guaranteed not to be caught for $1 million? And they wanted to see what percentage of young people at that age would answer yes to that. And it was like 13%. So disconcerting, but at least 87% or whatever said absolutely not. So it turned out, the universe, the synchronicities, the next day I was supposed to talk about antisocial personality disorders called now, but what we called in my youth psychopaths. And I was doing a unit on mental health, and that was just going to be a day-long thing. So I thought, I'm going to put that up on the board and find out how many of my students would answer yes to that question, and then started a dialogue about why. And it only turned out I had 150 students. It turned out only like 3 people said yes to that question. I was very heartened by that fact. Okay. But then I watched over 20 more years of being 25 years at Blaine High School, that number continued to shift upward until it increased by tenfold. There'd be 6 to 8 every time, and they would begin to debate each other whether they would do it for less. And many of them would say, I'd do it for $20,000. One kid said $2,000. The lowest bid was $2. Okay, really, and he was serious. Okay, and I know this kid, and so I saw more and more kids say yes to that, and their fundamental reason why is $1 million. And then when they had close friends in that class, and some of the friends were shocked to say the guy that they'd known since 3rd grade or whatever was answering yes to that. So they said, you wouldn't do that. That's somebody's grandparent. That's somebody's parent. That's somebody's child. How can you say yes to that? They said, you do it too. You just want to look good. You're just lying. If you get $1 million laid out to you and you'd never be caught. So they were seriously invested in that answer. And I was concerned as to why that number was going up. So I wrote the book to connect some dots. At the same time, I saw a study out of a really nice book called, a guy I know, Dick Leiter, who wrote a book on purpose and power of purpose. No, that's not the name. But anyway, it was a best-selling book, and he lived in Minneapolis, and he was a therapist, and Dr. Leiter wrote this book, and in that book there was a study, and they asked 60 kids at a university who had tried suicide in their freshman year, I think it might have been their sophomore year, had tried suicide, but they survived. They were trying to do a study, so they did as much analysis as they could. What would drive a kid to do that? Why would he, and what was on their mind? Because they had theories like, well, obviously not good parents, they didn't have parents that they could relate to, or some kind of trauma, their girlfriend broke up with them, or something like that. They all had their theories going in. But actually 85% of them gave an answer that essentially boiled down to this: why not? Life's hard. Life is really tough. You live, you die. Why suffer another 45 years? I've had enough little episodes of suffering. I went through a little glitch, but it wasn't that big a deal. But I could just see more down the road, so I thought, I'm not going to. So what those two taught me, the $1 million question, more and more kids willing to kill somebody, more and more kids willing to kill themselves, was the value of life had been somehow diminished. Okay, in both of those groups. So I thought, is there any dots that could connect those two realities, the kid trying to kill himself and the kid willing to kill somebody else? And so that's what the book is about, is that the culture has shifted. The world that your children And for some of you that have my hair, I had my first grandchild born 2 months ago. So that world's going to be very different than the world I grew up in. For one thing, they're going to see a lot less advertisements, right? They're going to see, you know, probably more in one day than their grandmother or great-grandmother saw in a lifetime, right? And what does every advertisement say? These things seep into the psyche of young people. Every advertisement says, you're not okay as you are. You're in some ways flawed because you need something outside yourself, then you'll be happy. There's something deficient that you need out here, and happiness lies in external things. Okay? And that pretty much, if you're going to have a good life, you need more stuff and you need to go more places and have more events in your life. And that's going to be, it's not that we shouldn't have some stuff and that we shouldn't have some events in our life, but if you're really, that's the 24/7 message of 3,500 or at least 3,000 advertisements a day now that young people are subjected to. Then gradually it's like, that's what life's about. Okay, life's about consumption and buying. So that's why I say, how do you transcend the economic culture that we all live in and the messages of that culture and live? I was just in India at an international conference where I was co-facilitating a group of people from all over the planet, because this is worldwide now. This kind of economic culture that dominates the value system of our kids and other kids is worldwide. So I was in India for a 10-day conference that I was co-hosting or co-facilitating on raising spiritually oriented children in the modern world. How do you do that? So that's what the book's kind of about. How do you do that? How do we help young people traverse the only world they know more skillfully, more balanced, and whatever? So you now have like 12 to 14-year-olds. I don't know if anybody have any kids in that age group in here? Okay, 12 to 14-year-olds have an 89% increase in suicide attempts, okay, in the last 2 decades. It's gone up 150% in children under 8. There was never a recorded case of a single kid that would try to kill themselves before World War II under 13. They didn't that doesn't mean it didn't happen, but they never found in any of the records or any of the local news, no child below the age of 13 have ever even tried suicide before 1945. Okay? And now you have 150. Now it's still rare, don't get me wrong, it's not like every third kid, but it's going up in all the age groups. So now we have 5,400 a day of youth, okay, trying to off themselves, okay. So it touches me just to hear that, because it's like, we got to stop that, okay. So how do we stop that? What do we do? Well, I want to actually read one more thing relative to what I said. I want to read, at the very beginning of my book, I said, here's the trends I see. Because I'd like to ask you, do you see these trends? And then the book is about how do we reverse those trends, okay? So overall, as I watch these kids over really almost 40 years of my life, both as their therapist or as their psychology teacher or as their mentor of one kind or another in coaching or whatever, these are the trends I begin to see in the larger culture. And I think some of them at least will hit home. And then we'll get to the reversal and the good news. There's a lot of good news because the book is constantly punctuated with young people who shift whatever their imbalances were around and how they take on some of these issues to make their life more joyful and more purpose-driven, those kinds of things. All right. So here's a brief sampling of some of the decreasing and increasing trends that have occurred over the last few decades. There has been a decrease in civility, listening, statesmanship, the art of compromise, patience, other-centeredness, connection to nature, humility, innocence, empathy, compassion, gratitude, purposeful living, ethical and spiritual understanding, and a dramatic loss of trust in each other. Okay. And I think it starts out, and the book will talk about how do we break trust to the point that I'm a little fearful of you. And I'm not sure I'm going to let my guard down. Why is there more of that energy? Why is there more of that energy in politics? Why can't we find common ground? Whatever. Well, we've now living in a culture of fear. Chapter 14 is, I call, the expansion and exploitation of fear. We use fear to sell products. We use fear to sell the weather. No, there's going to be a killer commute tomorrow. The words that they use, okay. You know, and it's just like the other day we had 1 or 2 inches. And as a child, I called that a light snow, you know, okay. And these storms, wow, you're going to get started. And I would just look forward to them as a kid and go out and run around in them. Okay, and now I'm supposed to keel over and go for the bunker. Okay. It's a weird kind of, because it does. The two motivators for us are spiritually oriented motivators or fear. And those are really what drive. And you'll see some pastors who are fear-based pastors. That's why I became an agnostic for a couple of years, because I wasn't having any joy in the congregation. It was sinners in the hands of an angry God, and I was a sinner. And so I go to church, okay, and I actually was sitting in the pew as a 7th or 8th grader. I think one day I will be a minister. I will be in that spot. That's what I thought as an 8th grader. So I was a very serious confirmation student. I was studying this. I was reading the Old Testament from the beginning to the end. And the Old Testament, there's some interesting things in there. They talk a little sexual stuff here and there as an adolescent, okay? But a lot of it was just kind of dry stuff I didn't understand, but I said I'm going to do it, and so I did it. Right? So at that point in time, I'm very serious about maybe becoming a theology student or whatever. And but my minister drove me out of it, I swear to God, because he was never happy. And to me, above all, the first sign of a spiritual person is somebody who, even as it's falling apart around you, can dance with it a little bit. Okay, can find internally that place of contentment and joy, so that you're there to minister to others and not get so lost in your fears, kind of thing. So anyway, I think we're really actually manufacturing fear. We do it also, though, that if your security needs aren't met in the first 2 years, we all know this, you don't have to be a psychologist to know that if somebody is locked in a closet, let's say, and I'm not saying this happens, but if somebody's locked in a closet at age 2, it's more damaging than at age 18 for a month, let's say, right? Because it scars deeper. Okay, if somebody's sexually abused, even though it's horrible at 12 and you're raped at 12, if it happens at 1, it's really hard to reverse those courses, because what happens is the mind of a 1-year-old is the mind like this. The mind it's a concrete thinking mind. Bad things are happening, I must be bad. Because if you ask a 1 or 2-year-old, why is the sun shining? Not always, but they'll oftentimes say, to keep me warm. Why is the grass green? It's one of my favorite colors. It's an egocentric based, and that's the psychology that they're supposed to have. They're developing a little ego. They're supposed to develop an ego. We're supposed to drop our ego later, but we have to first develop a strong one before we drop it. And if you have a weak ego because you've been abused or neglected or nobody's there. So when we put kids into daycares at 3 months and 2 months and 4 months, it's not always horrible, because it depends on the context. There can be a lot of love at those places. You can bring a lot of love. But overall, we're playing against the odds, because historically, they had an extended family. Now we live in a culture where the extended family lives far away. So if you're having a little trouble with your teenager, you always had Aunt Matilda living right next to you who had a good connection to your son to say, let's go for a walk, right? When I travel the world, I still see that in third world countries. They're right there in the same village, and the whole village is parenting. And they don't even have to say so, really. Because I say in the book, the first thing, how many of you have seen this, that young people overall, some of them are more emotionally reactive, a little more angry energy, or in your face kind of energy. Okay, so I talk about kind of why that is, but the first thing that happens, there's been an erosion of values, okay, and because values are what sets limits. That's the first thing that causes us to rein in our negative emotions. Because I had the value that I would not give my dad the finger or swear at him, all right? My son says to me when he first swore at me, he was like, it's just a word, Dad, get over it. That would have never occurred to me to say to my dad, okay. First of all, my dad was a big guy, a loving person, president of the congregation, okay. Had a conversion and was a very deeply spiritual man, but he also was in the military, okay, World War II. And he grew up in the value system that says, you don't give your dad that kind. And so he would have done something. Or if I did that to my mother, he would have said something. And I would have, here's the key, I would have felt he was right. I would have felt I stepped over the bound, because those are the limits of the culture. But we're living in a culture where those limits are, so if you watch TV, reality TV, every couple of years it gets worse, how bizarre what you're seeing, because they have to, because after 2 years you're bored with it. So they got to push the limit. It's got to get more bizarre. So our kids grow up to some degree in a world that has very few limits. You watch South Park. Now the people might be very creative that watch South Park, but it's still a guttural humor. It's a very base kind of, it's not, to use yoga term, sattvic humor. It doesn't lift the spirit. Okay. You know how you can lift the spirit with humor, even playing around with my bus driver stories, you know, it's a little way to connect, you know, it's an innocent way to say that I was meant to be with youth, okay, and I learned some things, okay, and have some fun in the process. So the first thing we have to do is take a look at what we expose our kids to in terms of limits, because it's really hard to be a parent these days. One, because you don't have as much of the extended family, and two, because I learned with my own kids, I couldn't say no to certain things because it would be like every hour or two I'd have to say, no, we're not going to do that. So I had to choose my battles a little bit with good discrimination and allow a little bit more than I would have or would have been allowed for me. It just, otherwise I think it would have been a net loss. But so you have to make those fine. My dad never had to make that discrimination. Why? Because you live here. That's why you got to quit doing that. Okay, good enough for me. Now, by maybe 17, I was going, oh, that's stupid. But I said that inside my own head. Okay. Many of you live in families where they don't keep it inside their own head. Okay. So anyway, so it's a different world, and that's my point. Now, here's the other thing that are increasing. So here's what I see increasing. Fear, bullying, sarcasm. Sarcasm is the humor of shame. It attacks the whole person. And you should watch how kids do it to each other. Because just watch TV. It's almost all sarcasm. Seriously. It's a character assassination. Now sometimes it's gloriously funny at one level. Okay. And if you really know the person well and they're good friends, and Tom could be sarcastic to me and I would know he means no ill, I wouldn't internalize it. Okay. But young people, not so much. Okay. So even sarcasm probably has some place, whatever, but we have to watch it. But that's the norm now. Okay. So violence and hostility, gangs, there's been a 40% increase in gangs in the last 3 years, and I think they're looking for connection and bonding. I think it's the same reason why people have to text. It was only 400 texts for teenagers in 2007. It's now 3,500. Okay, I had one person, I remember this is 3 years ago, 8,800 texts that month. And she was neurotically needing to connect because her family didn't build those connections. Okay, so I think a lot of it is something happened at a young age, and now I got to feel tethered because I felt untethered. You know, both parents working, or you know, whatever it was that felt that untethered. So we really have to work at looking at what's getting created, even though they have a good daycare. Okay, so we have to go the extra mile. And the truth is, we're doing it. In the last 15 years, actually, parents are spending more time with their kids. So there's a movement in the right direction. But if you ask those parents, this is interesting. Yeah, I spend, you know, this much. My dad never spent that much time with me. And so kids are getting a lot more of their parents in some cases. Not all cases, but, you know, a growing trend, I'd say, a very healthy trend. But when you ask those actual parents, they say, but I feel a little guilty because I'm always multitasking as I do it. You know, I'm cooking because I just got home from work. And yeah, okay, all right. So, okay, you got a new girlfriend, huh? Okay. Making fudge. Okay, whatever. So I think one of the things that if I was to give any advice to parents, I say two things. Any hope we have of nudging the ball in the right direction, whatever your conscience would say the right direction is in your family system, requires us to have a really as deep a relationship as they'll let, which means we have to be present, which doesn't mean necessarily a huge uptick in quantity, but quality. So multitasking, which you, by the way, can't do. There's a new book out in May, and it's well worth reading, The Myth of Multitasking. It's science-based stuff. Because all that's happening in multitasking is you're shifting concentration back and forth between two things. Okay? And neither one with as much quality. Okay. So how many of you have noticed this? I noticed this, you know, I've worked with, for my last 12 years, really at-risk kids, angry kids, depressed kids, Asperger's kids, kids that were disconnected, kids that had been made to feel extraneous to their high school environment. And so when I was working with them, I was amazed. First thing I did was when they come into my office, and a lot of them, they didn't want to be there much with a white-haired, cotton swab-looking guy. Okay. So they'd come in, but I didn't say much. I'd say, you know, are you willing to tell me about your life from the earliest memory you have to right now? The good, the bad, and the ugly. Whatever, and if you want to edit something and not tell me about it, that's your privilege. Okay, but whatever you'd care to share. Yeah, okay, I'll do that. I said, you don't have to even get it done in one time. If you come back next week, we'll pick up from where you left. What I learned was it was the greatest way to make a connection because nobody had ever listened to them in that way. Just sat there and let them say, yeah, and then this happened, boy, you know. He's like mad on the bus, and it was just like awful. I had zits on my face, and they just went after me. And whatever it was that they decided to focus on was so meaningful for them to just have, and all I would do is look at them, you know, make eye contact. And then from that point on, we were connected because most of them couldn't make eye contact. I can't tell you the number of clients and the number of students I had that the first time I met them, it was like I thought there was things on my ceiling. Yeah, and then my mom went away and she just left the family. Okay. And because they were like, anybody have that dream where you end up in a dream, kind of naked in a dream? You know, I don't know, it's a very common dream where you're only half dressed. And as soon as I learned to make eye contact with people, I never had that dream again. I wasn't undressed ever again. Okay. I could look at people's eyes and they could see the worst or the best in me. That was fine. But before I would type, what is this when I can't look at you? Because you're going to, if you ever had that awkwardness, somebody's going to look into you and see something that they're going to judge. So we look away. Okay. So they really, it was like salve on some deep wounds. I didn't know which wounds, but it was that salve. Over, say, the year that I worked with them, I had them sometimes for 3 years. It was great. So I could see them once a week for 3 years. And you could just see they got comfortable in their own skin because at some level, if you were accepting of them, they began to internalize that they were still acceptable despite the fact that I used too much pot or doing whatever it was that they were into. Okay, but actually most of my kids, when we were to address drug use, they would say, there's no downsides to that. But when you have a relationship, so the first thing I recommend is develop a relationship. Because as soon as I had a relationship with these kids, I could tell and say to them, I could discipline them like their parents could. Because I wasn't their parents, and they wouldn't react immediately to it. So I could say to them, if you do that, you're going to just end up in jail. Okay? Or I could say to them, when they really say, how's that working for you? They said, I'm just going to give that person a piece of my mind because nobody's going to treat me like that. When I go see my employer, I'm going to tell him off. And I said, how do you think that's going to work for you? And they'd say, horrible. I probably shouldn't. And they'd revisit, and they would reconsider, and they would change, okay? But you had to have the relationship first. If I was there going, well, you're done, and they could tell in my tone or my look or whatever, judgment, okay? How many of you know a young person who will go down in flames before they'll let you control them? Because it's about control. There's a really nice reading. Maybe I'll bring some readings next week, but it's called Self-Defeating Kids. I'll tell a story. True story, it's in the book. I call him Ron, his name's not Ron. Ron comes in, right away I say we're in trouble. Ron's in I can see through I'm in the office, I'm looking at Ron and his mother, and they're arguing like cats and dogs in front of other people in a public setting, okay, basically in the waiting room of this clinic, family mental health center. So I think I gotta separate them is the first thing I do. So when I go out there, I'm gonna take mom first, chill her down a little bit. I'll learn some dad and she'll tell me why he's even here. I don't even know. Okay. So I get in there, I say, Mom, would you come with me? I'll be back around for you. And Ron's like, whatever. I don't even know I don't think he can talk. So Mom comes back with me. She's telling me every negative quality of her son. Okay. Last week he blew up the chemistry lab in 8th grade. He put sugar in the guy's car. I think he's drinking, I don't know for sure, and she just went through the litany, and then the last thing after she showed me these horror stories about her son, she never said one good thing. I said, is there anything good you can tell me? Not really. Okay. So then I said to her, okay, that's fine, I'll go see him now, we got about 20-some minutes left, and she gets up and starts to walk out, and then she comes back into the doorway and says, somebody's got to fix him, so you fix him. Okay. So, all right, we'll try. So now we go up and get Ron. Ron comes in. Ron was the only person who could blend so in the chair. I thought he was a slipcover. You ever been with a 12 or 13-year-old, they give you every vibe, but I don't want to be here, and you get nothing. Okay. Now my goal is to get information from this kid. I got nothing. So we got 25 minutes together. About 15 minutes into him, I've asked him every question known to man. Okay, so what do you like to do for fun? Not much, nothing, bull, whatever it was. I've got one-word answers. Okay, and so I was trying, and after a while, I got this flash of intuition, which is your mind stays quiet and you don't personalize it and say, God, I'm losing it as a therapist, or okay, this kid's a jerk. If you're not doing any of that and you're just watching the show, okay, just kind of neutral. Like it's an interesting movie, but so far it's a kind of a slow beginning. So I'm in that spot, and therefore, this is the cool thing about one of the things that Tom and I know from meditation, and some of you too, is the key to being a good parent too, is how emotionally non-reactive you are. This doesn't mean you couldn't be firm and actually use anger. Christ used anger when he threw out the people, the money changers. But I'm convinced he never lost his connection to God. in that moment. It was tactical. It wasn't because somebody pushed his button. I don't think that's possible with Christ. Okay? So can we get in that place where nobody can push our buttons? Well, that requires us to have a very centered, quiet, still mind in connection to the source. Okay. So now I'm in there with Ron. He's the slipcover guy, but he actually took his chair too and turned it because he's not going to face me. Right? So every way he could say, I hate you, and you have white hair, and you have nothing to say to me. Okay. So we're now 7 minutes in, and I have this flash of intuition from that quiet center, and I think, Ron, you want to leave, right? And he really perked up. He actually sat up. Damn right. And I said, okay. You can only leave. We're going to go the full time unless you answer one question honestly, because so far you've given me nothing. That's when he smiled and actually laughed a little because he knew I was right. Okay. So now he smiled a little bit because he knew I saw it kind of through the veneer, and I said, so all you have to do, and then you're out of here. Okay. I think there's about 10 minutes left. And he was pretty excited, so he said, one question. If I answered honestly, I said, if you answered honestly, you're out of here as soon as you answer it. Okay. So this is all coming out of this intuitive flash. I said to him, okay, you ready? Well, I want the first thing that you have in your mind to come out as soon as I ask you this question. And then, so it'll be on. I don't want any hesitation. You ready? Get it? Yep, got it. Okay, I get to leave, right? Yep, you get to leave. Here you go. Who are you? And I deliberately said it loud and with a finger pointing at him because I wanted to shock him. I wanted to scare him for a minute so that you speak the truth. And without hesitation, he said, I'm a badass. Real loud, okay? And then he went on and said, I come from a family of badasses. Okay. My brother's already in St. Cloud prison. Okay. I started drinking when I was 7. Okay. You know, and he went on to describe for the full 10 minutes. Until about 30 seconds left, he said, oh, I could have left. Because he had, and this is what the book talks about, we have 4 basic urges, and the 4th one is self-preservation. And what that means in the human species is your egoic preservation. And he had developed a crystallized notion of ego. I'm a badass. I come from family. That was his story. And he had totally become his story. Because whatever you believe about yourself, you'll manifest. Okay? So now he had to be a badass. So when he came back for the second week, I said, gosh, last week we talked about you see yourself as a badass. I don't doubt that you are to some extent sometimes. But do you ever do any good ass behaviors? Kind of smiling, and he said, what do you mean? No. And I said, no, I mean, are you ever kind? Ever show a little sensitive side? Or is it just all hard ass stuff? Okay, and he said, with my dog. With my dog, my dog's old, he has bad back legs. I pick him up, get him into the car, you know, I feed him. We try to go for walks as long as he can stand. And I said, see, you got some good ass stuff in there. And my goal was to actually get him to see that there's a kind of buried quite a ways down there. Another aspect of himself. Anything else? I like my grandpa. Okay, he always accepts me. We go fishing. We don't talk about how I blew up the chemistry lab. Okay. We talk about, wow, that was a nice size crappie. And through that, what did the grandfather communicate? He communicated that you matter, that I accept you as you are.